finish up Song of Songs, unless, of course, I get bogged down on some obscure verse, but that's the attempt. Now, everyone can hear me clearly, right? Good. If you can't, just sound the alarm. I have a table here, but I need to look at the book as I look at you, so I need a little space back here. Chapter 6. Now, this is just the overview. I think more and more that this book, which stresses the voice of the woman, as no other book in the Bible does, is a kind of, I think, maybe conscious refutation of the Garden of Eden story. Remember, the garden image is constantly used, meaning the personal parts of the woman. And we talk about grapes and pomegranates and all kinds of fruits. The more intimate it gets, the more it talks about fruits to represent parts that usually are expressed metaphorically. But of course, we've seen that although the King James Version has a discussion of how much he's in love with her navel, in fact, it turned out it was not the navel, but something below there that interested him. And the language is quite explicit. I wouldn't call this pornography. I just say it's a deeply erotic poem. And that is not unusual in the ancient world. The verses of Omar Khayyam we're not sure what they were originally in the Persian, but we know that Fitzgerald translated them with such magnificence in the 19th century. It's erotic poetry. And this is certainly among the most blatantly erotic poetry that is found in ancient literature. Now, and as you know, it only got into the Bible because they read it as an analogy, well, what's the word? An allegory of God's relationship with Israel, our Christ's relationship with the church. It has nothing to do with that. But they went on, page after page after page after page. Every statement in this book has been meant to mean something else. His interest in getting into her gate, which is clear enough if you read it, what he means, that is God's presence, the Shekhinah, re-entering the gates of holy Jerusalem. So Rabbi Akiba could say the whole Bible is holy, but this book is the Holy of Holies. It's the most intimate statement of God's love for his people. Now, I revel in God's love for his people and for all peoples, but that's not what this book is about. So the Garden of Eden story, remember, the voice of the woman, the Kol Isha, is what got Adam in trouble. Because you have listened to the voice of your woman, cursed is everything, said God. And you've lost the Garden of Eden and you shouldn't have listened to her. Now, the men who, of course, create these religions never noticed that later in the book of Genesis, when Abraham is hesitating about sending his concubine and his son, Hagar and Ishmael, away in order to make Isaac's place secure, Sarah, his wife, says, you've got to do it or there'll be chaos here. And we'll never know who is. I mean, look what's gone on in Islam over who is the true, where the Shiites have one successor to the prophet and the Sunnis have another. And they're still fighting a war that goes back to the 7th century. And that war is much realer to them than the Cold War was, or our differences with Russia or whatever. That's the war they're still fighting. Now, had Abraham not sent Hagar and Ishmael away, we'd have two kinds of Israelite religion. Well, in a way we do. We have Islam and Judaism, or Judaism/Christianity, which goes with Isaac. But within the Jewish fold, you would have two warring factions. I mean, who ever heard of Jews arguing and warring against each other? Ha ha, what a fantasy. Well, things would have been much more complicated. So God said, listen to the Kol Isha, listen to the voice of your wife. Now, the Orthodox rabbis never look at that passage. They look at the one saying, because you listen to the voice of your wife, you're accursed. Well, I guess it depends on who your wife is. Some people have common sense and some don't, same with men. Some men should listen to their wives and some should not. And some women should listen to their husbands and some should not. But the Adam story became iconic for the whole tradition. And therefore, and of course, the problem is, I don't say all the rabbis read it this way, but it seems to me clearly it's an Oedipal myth. It's about the boy Adam wanting to possess the garden, the intimacy with his mother, and that sexual awakening. It's a story of innocence moving to adolescent awakening, which causes such trouble in the home with parents. And when children realize they can be a daddy or a mommy too, then they rebel against their own parents to assert their own, that's why their own dignity. And that's why I always, for 42 years, and still call my students by their first names. This is a different thing. This is an intimate family situation, if you will. And so call me Michael. But I mean, the things that I want you to call me, but call Michael as a, remember what the Ayatollah Khamenei said. The Ayatollah Khamenei said, you can call me Aya and you can call me Tola and you can call me Mamie, but you dasn't call me Kaka. Well, call me Michael. But you, in the class with 18-year-olds, I would always insist, they would call me Professor Kogan or Dr. Kogan, and I would call them Mr. Jones and Miss Smith. And they were trying to establish in college, which is a proper time to do it, their independent identity. And I thought I should help them. Why should I address them as children by their first name? Then they'd have to call me Michael. I did have one student who called me Mike, even though I called him Mr. Towers, he called me Mike. And I said, even my mother never called me Mike. That's not my name. But I'm not going to argue with him if that's what he wants. It's sort of pompous to say, no, you have to call me Dr. Kogan. Well, let's get back to the topic from which I have strayed as usual. In the Garden of Eden, sex is the problem. Remember that there are 3 creation stories in the Bible, the 2 complete ones. The 6-day story, sex is not a problem. He says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. He encourages man and woman created as equals, as partners at the same moment to do what's necessary to have children, Peru, Urvu, and fill the earth, be fruitful and multiply. But in the Garden of Eden story, written by another hand, much earlier, you have a totally different situation in which the problem is sexuality, when the children discover it and daddy is angry. Well, both stories are true. Everything in the Bible is true. As I said a million times, not factual, but true. It is true that we must be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. It's also true that parents get very nervous about that, and that kids rebel against their parents and perhaps dabble in sex long before they're really ready for it. And there are all kinds of conflicts. That's true too. So both stories are true. They just tell different sides of the truth. However, the problem in the Garden of Eden story is sex. The problem in the Song of Songs, in which he is constantly talking about the girl as a garden, is the frustration of sexuality. I think they only get together definitely once, maybe twice, but the rest is her fantasy dreams. I mean, we've seen 2 very erotic dreams from her side, not from his. That's why there must have been a woman writing this. This must be a team, maybe an older, it's hard to imagine 20-year-olds writing such magnificent stuff, but it's happened. Elizabeth Barrett wrote some beautiful things very young. And when did Emily Dickinson begin, the greatest of our American poets? I'm counting T.S. Eliot as English. Probably I don't know. I'll look it up tonight. You can look up anything in a minute. But look, the prophet Joseph Smith wrote the whole Book of Mormon when he was 20 years old. Mamma mia, hundreds of pages, thousands of characters, cities falling and being razed, and earthquakes and plagues and battles. Amazing accomplishment. So there are a lot of very bright 20-year-olds around. I had some of them in my classes. I wish I'd had more. Well, but whoever wrote this, I picture, and it's just my fancy, I picture a team of people now middle-aged looking back on their love affair. I remember listening to my cousin Jastrow Levin. He happened to marry General Robert E. Lee's cousin, who converted to Judaism and had a kosher home. And they were a wonderful couple. They loved each other desperately. They were poor all their lives. They lived They were teachers in the Baltimore school system. They fell in love, and they told me about how they used to share an ice cream soda. They were so poor with 2 straws. And when they were in their 80s, and they would walk across the lawn holding hands like 18-year-olds. I mean, they were madly in love, and so much in love that on the holiday, when we read the Song of Songs in the spring, the rabbi would always ask them to go to the pulpit and read it to each other. And he would read the boys' part, and she would read the girls' part. And so perhaps this was jointly written by a man and a woman looking back on their initial intense love affair. And I can't imagine a man writing so intimately about a woman's sexual desire, I think, and recognizing that. So here the woman has the voice. She's the dominant voice, not like Eve, who is shut up in the Garden of Eden. God doesn't even tell Eve, thou shalt not eat of the fruit. He tells Adam, who may not have bothered to tell Eve, and that's why she took the fruit. So it's a totally different take on women, on their dignity, on their selfhood, on the meaning. This is a new garden where sexual, not just random sexuality, but if 2 people are so madly in love, for them to express that physically is a holy thing. At least that's the idea. There's no moralizing about, 2 students once came to me. You got to be very careful on these topics with students. And they said, this is after they were students of mine. And they had met in my classroom, and I was so happy. And then they came to me and they said, well, we're living so-and-so, come and visit us. But I'm afraid they thought I'd judge them. We're living in sin. I said, no, you're living in love. And that's what this book is about. It's a new garden where the woman's voice is heard and respected, and where her dignity is affirmed, and where her beloved praises her as she praises him, not only her soul, but her body. And that's the way young love is. And so let's continue with chapter 6 in that light. First, we have what I think verse 1 is the chorus. Remember, you've got the boy, the girl, and the chorus of harem girls who are the friends of the girl, and who they are commenting on her attempts to get together with him, encouraging her. But of course, it's not easy. She's got to get out of Solomon's harem, if I'm right, if that's where she is. And she's got to get to where the shepherds are. And she managed it to get to the wine house and consummate the relationship with him early. The other 2 seeming consummations, I now think, are probably dream fantasies of hers, dreams express an unfulfilled wish, as Freud said. Chapter 6, verse 1, the chorus. Whither has your love gone, O fairest among women? Whither has your love turned, that we may seek him with you? Let us help to find him. But where is he? She responds, my love has gone down to his garden, to the balsam beds, to browse in the garden, to pluck lotuses. And in other words, he's trying to get to me. In fact, if he's not there, maybe she's saying he's already with me. And we're in that wonderful garden of love. I don't know, or else he'd like to be with me. And now you have the famous lines again, which is repeated, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. Dodi li v'ani lo. People wear it on lockets around their neck. They may mean God, as the rabbis interpreted this, or they may mean maybe their husband or their boyfriend gave it to them, and they're wearing that. Dodi li v'ani lo, very beautiful. There's a song, Dodi li v'ani lo, da 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 da. Israeli song. I am my beloved's, and my beloved's is mine. He who feeds on the lotus. Again, fruits and vegetables symbolizing sexuality. And now the boy speaks in verse 4 and for the rest of several verses. Fair are you, my darling, very pleasing, beautiful as Jerusalem, awesome with trophies. Avert your eyes from me, for they drive me wild. I don't know what your translation says, but they drive me wild. I can't look into your eyes. I mean, this boy is very enamored. It's a sickness of love, he says. She says, I'm sick with love. Beautiful words. Avert your eyes. I can't stand to look directly in your eyes. They're driving me wild. And again, now he repeats his praise from earlier. Your hair is like a flock of goats. Now, this is what a shepherd would think is a great compliment. Streaming down Gilead, meaning it just falls down with long hair so beautifully. Your teeth like a flock of ewes coming up from the washing, meaning they're shiny bright. And verse 7, like a slice of pomegranate, your cheeks, behind your veil. Well, the girls in the harem would wear veils, modesty, except when they took it off to be with King Solomon. And now I think he's talking about the harem. 60 queens are they, 80 concubines, girls without number. This is where she lives. And then he goes on. The reason he brought them up was to say, among all these beautiful girls, and you can imagine Solomon would have assembled the most beautiful, my love is unique. I don't want them all. I want my girl. I got my girl. Who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for anything more? Remember that? 60 queens, 80 concubines, girls without number in the harem. But verse 9, unique is my love. She's special, my perfect one. Unique she is to her mother, favorite of her parents. The girls saw and praised her. Queens and concubines lauded her. All her girlfriends in the harem know that she is the most beautiful of them all and the most desirable. Verse 10, who is this that looks forth as the dawn, fair as the moon, bright as the sun, awesome with trophies? Well, of course, the answer is my girl. Verse 11, to the walnut grove I went down to view the valley verdure, to see if the vines had blossomed, if the pomegranates had bloomed. Who knows what this means? But I would like to say that he went down to the harem, the walnut grove, with all these lovely girls, like a forest, and he's sort of looking through the lattice and seeing if his special pomegranate is there. Is he searching for her? She's searching for him, but maybe he comes to search for her. Again, it's hypothesis because the poetry is vague. But then I think this is not so vague. Verse 12. Many people find this, many commentators, extremely daunting verse. I don't. Unawares, I was set in the chariot with the prince. My girl makes me feel like a prince. That's how she makes me feel. And I think that's what he's saying. He's looking, he said, all those lovely girls in the harem, she, of course, is the most wonderful, the only one I want. She makes me feel like a king. And that's what a woman should make a man feel like, and what a man should make his woman feel like. Royalty. And that comes with intense love. There is a movie called Mr. Skeffington with Claude Rains and Bette Davis. And the key idea is, as she gets older, she's gorgeous in the beginning, and he marries her, a Jewish stockbroker, and she marries him to get enough money to bail her profligate brother out of some stock swindling scheme he was involved with. But he loves her anyway. It may be Claude Rains' greatest performance. Well, there's always Casablanca, but there's always Casablanca forever. But she's always so worried about whether she's beautiful. And he says to her, what was her name? A woman is only beautiful when she's loved. And she is too shallow to understand that. But then the years go by, and she becomes not beautiful. Matronly, perhaps, but not beautiful. But the ravages of time are not kind to her in the movie. But he comes back to her at the end, and he's blind. He's been in a concentration camp, and they took his sight, tortured him. But he comes back with white hair, in a sense, a broken man, but he comes back to the house, Fanny Skeffington, and he's looking, he still loves her. And in his eyes, she'll always be young and beautiful, because that's when he last saw her, decades ago. And as they walk up the stairs together, the doctor, her friend, says, Fanny, I've never seen you look more beautiful. And she says, well, as Job always says, a woman is only beautiful when she's loved. It's a wonderful movie. If you don't know it, see it at once. Chapter 7. The boy. Leap, leap, O Shulamite. Leap, leap, and let us gaze on you. How will you gaze on a Shulamite? In the dance of the two camps. Has to do with the place of her origin, perhaps. He's asking her now. She talking about his leaping as a gazelle or whatever. He is now saying, dance. He loves to see her dance. And he goes on. How beautiful your sandaled feet, O prince's daughter. Now he is going to go over her body. She did it with him from the top down, from his eyes down to his mouth and his torso and his loins and his legs, praising every part, alabaster and all of this. He is going to describe her from the bottom up. And the language is explicit, so be prepared. I don't know what your translations say, but I choose this translation because it says what it says. Verse 2, he starts with her sandaled feet. How beautiful your sandaled feet, O prince's daughter, your curvy thighs like ornaments, crafted by artists' hands. Your vulva is a rounded crater. May it never lack punch. Your belly a mound of wheat, hedged by lotuses. Your breasts like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck like an ivory tower. Your eyes, the pools of Heshbon, by the gate of Bat Rabim. Your nose like towering Lebanon, overlooking Damascus. Well, the standards for noses in the Middle East are different from ours. Your head on you like Carmel, like Mount Carmel. The locks of your head like purple. A king captive in the trenches, is that in the tresses? Is that Solomon? You've captured the king, that's why he took you into his harem. A king, or maybe he's the king. A king captive in the tresses. How fair, how pleasant you are, O love, daughter of delights. Your stature resembles the palm. That's her whole body. So she did the same with him. She commented every organ from the eyes down, and then she said, generally speaking, you're pretty impressive. And he's saying, generally speaking, you're like the palm tree. I'm coming to you from the state of the palmetto tree, the palmetto state. And we honor that symbol. It's on our flag and our state symbol because it saved us from British invasion. A fort made of palmetto logs in the harbor saved us from the British invasion in 1776. So that's why we honor that tree, which is ubiquitous here. Your stature resembles the palm, verse 8. Your breasts, he goes back to the breasts twice. I guess that's what he likes. The secondary sexual characteristics are generally more talked about than the primary ones. The manly chest of the man, the breasts of the woman, etc. So he is, I won't say he's fixated, but he brings them up 3 or 4 times. Your stature resembles the palm, your breasts, the clusters. He thinks I'll climb the palm. Well, that's clear enough. I'll grasp its branches. Let your breasts be like grape clusters. The scent of your vulva like apples, the fruit again, the fruit of the tree. Your palate like the best wine. Wine intoxicates, love intoxicates. Same thing. And your palate, that is your mouth, kisses sweeter than wine, etc., flowing smoothly, stirring sleeper's lips. He wants to kiss her, of course. Verse 11. Again, I belong to my beloved. This is the girl speaking. Now she's responding to the boy's praise. I belong to my beloved, and for me is his desire. Well, he just expressed that desire. Come, my love. Let us hie to the field, to your territory, where you're a shepherd. Let us lie in the cypress. Let us get to the vineyards, of course, highly sexual, the grapes. We will see if the vine sprouts. That's interesting. Maybe a phallic reference. If the blossoms bud, a reference to her. If the pomegranate flowers, in other words, if we can consummate. There I will give you my love. Now, do they do it? I'd like to think they do it every time she talks about it, but I don't. She says, let's do it. Whether she ever gets to do it or not, after that initial encounter in the wine house, I don't know. The mandrakes give scent. Now, mandrakes are a rooted plant, and the roots are believed throughout the Bible to be an aphrodisiac. Jacob's two wives, sisters, Leah and Rachel, were vying for who could get hold of the mandrakes to stimulate him. They were the Viagra of the day. So they represent active sexuality. The mandrakes give scent. At our door is every delicacy. Things both old and new, memories of their love past and commitment to carrying it on. My love, I have stored for you. Lovely. Well, we're up to the last chapter. I mean, I can give endless commentary about how the Targum sees this, how the rabbis see it, in and out of the Talmud. But since I think it's all nonsense, you can read that in biblical commentary on your own. I don't want to waste time with it. This is what it. Sometimes things are just what they mean. Chapter 8. Now the girl continues. Oh, that you were as my brother, that you had that kind of access, who sucked the breasts of my mother. I would find you in the street and kiss you, and none would scorn me for it, because she's kissing her brother. But of course, if she kisses him, they would scorn her. I would lead you to my mother's house. I would, but does she? I wonder. I would lead you to my mother's house, bring you to the chamber of her who bore me. I would make you drink spiced wine. Well, always symbolic here of sexuality. I want to take you home to show mom. I'm so proud of you. I would make you drink spiced wine, the juice of my pomegranate. His left hand under my head, his right hand embracing me. Well, this is coitus, but is it factual or is it a hoped for fantasy? It's very hard to say. But there we are. Where are we? So the hand of the left hand under my head, the right hand embracing me. And now the chorus, or she speaking to the chorus. I adjure you, Jerusalem girls, that you neither incite nor excite love until it is eager, until it's the right time. So she's hoping to get together with the boy, and but she says there's a time for everything, and I hope it's going to happen. I do too. I'm for them. Verse 5. Who is this ascending from the step? Now the boy is speaking about the girl. So it goes back and forth and back and forth. Who is it ascending from the field, leaning on her lover? Under the apple tree I aroused you. There your mother conceived you. There she who bore you conceived. So he's either talking about an actual assignation. It sounds like it. This doesn't sound like a fantasy. He sees her in his mind's eye leaning on her lover. They're walking together. Under the apple tree, I aroused you. And the apple tree, that's both a female and a male elements are represented here in that the roundness of the apple and the tree. There your mother conceived you. There she who bore you conceived. Send me, and then he goes on, and maybe this is why we put this in the wisdom literature, that the writers of this canticle believed that the greatest joy was to embrace your beloved emotionally and physically. And that certainly is a good contender for it. And they're looking back and saying, well, at least, I hope, I think they're older. I don't think they could put it together at 20, probably not possible. But they're remembering the last speech in the movie, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? With the great Spencer Tracy, who, to my mind, is the greatest film actor of all time, because you'd never catch him acting. The daughter falls in love with a black man, a distinguished surgeon, but he's black. And this was made in the 60s, I think. And it's a brilliant movie. And first he resists. He's the father, of course, Spencer Tracy. But then at the end, he gives a speech of several minutes. And he died 2 weeks later. And this is his last speech on film. And it is his epitaph. Magnificent. He said, "You think we're old and dried out? You're right. But I remember what I had with your mother when we were courting and when we were first married. And that memory is the most precious thing I have. And if what you two feel for each other is anything like that, then of course, you have to, whatever we might think, doesn't matter. You have to be together." And it was a stunning acting, magnificent. And remember, he's the famous one who, when a young actor went up to him and said, "Mr. Tracy, I want to be an actor like you." And he said, "Son, there's nothing to acting. Just never let them catch you doing it." And that's why he was such a natural. If you haven't seen, I'm giving a lot of movie recommendations tonight. If you haven't seen Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, please do give yourself the pleasure and be ready for that last speech, one of the great speeches on film. So I think this book may have made its way into the wisdom literature, because this now that we're going to read is the boy's statement of what wisdom really is, what the meaning of life is, what life, the greatest experience of life is. Certainly as a 20-year-old would see it. Verse 6, "Set me as a sign upon your heart, as a sign upon your arm. For love is strong as death, passion fierce as hell. Its darts are darts of fire, its flames like fire. Mighty waters cannot quench love." So this is the fire that water cannot quench. "No torrents can sweep it away. If a man were to give all the wealth of his house for love, it would be despised." This is worth everything, every penny, every possession. Jesus gave 2 sermons on the kingdom of God. And they just popped into my mind. I wasn't going to bring them up, but you never know what I'm going to bring up. And that's good, free association. And they said, "What is the kingdom, Lord, and where is it?" And he said, "The kingdom of God is like a treasure hid in the field. When a man finds it, he goes and sells all that he owns and buys that field. And again, the kingdom of God is like a pearl of great price, which when a man finds, he goes and gives up all that he has to buy that pearl." So the relationship with God is the pearl of great price. That's the great metaphor that comes down from the very eloquent words of Jesus. And this is very similar. The relationship with God, yes, infinitely precious, one of love. And I would use the analogy of a love affair on earth. It's a love affair. And love affairs don't run smooth. And we argue with God and we shake our fist against God. But we love him and we come back. And there's a story of the rabbi who saw the brown shirts rioting through his German city and killing Jews right and left. And he runs into the synagogue and rips open the curtain of the ark. And he says, Rabbono Shalom, master of the world, do something. How can you allow this to happen? As long as you allow this to happen, I will never pray to you again. And then his assistant comes in and says, it's time for the evening prayers. And he says, oh, closes the ark and they start the evening prayers. It's a wrestling match. The Bible is infinitely eloquent in saying the model is Jacob wrestling. And he doesn't even know with whom he is wrestling. He concludes, I have seen God. But when he asks the other with whom he's wrestling, who are you? The other answers, as I would translate it, how can you ask such a question? Immanuel Kant said, human beings are the beings who ask the unanswerable questions. Not what time is it, but what is time? Not how much space there is between me and the wall, but what is space? And beyond that, what is the infinite and the eternal, which we cannot begin to comprehend, as Job understood, and which Kohelet understands. Except, if you believe in revelation, as I personally do, God has revealed what he has chosen to reveal to us in the revelation to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, and to our whole tradition and the prophets and the priests, and in the wisdom literature. This seems agnostic literature. Where does God come in? But in wrestling with love, I mean, remember, I used to give a lecture on the films of Ingmar Bergman, and he doesn't directly talk about God. In The Seventh Seal, you've got to see that movie, maybe the greatest ever made. God is the issue, and death is the issue. But when the knight asks death, tell me about God, and death is silent, death is real enough, and he plays chess with death throughout the film. It's a masterpiece. Death gives no answer, and he says, don't you know anything about God? And he answers in Swedish, ningading, nothing. And yet the movie is all about God, because it's all about love. The one family, it's a crusader knight comes back from the Crusades to a Sweden racked with the Black Plague. And ultimately he and his family succumb, and everyone in the movie succumbs, except for a family, kind of gypsy-like family in a wagon. And they're Joseph and Mary and the baby Jesus, clearly in the movie. And they love each other. As they love, nobody else in this film loves anybody, but they love each other. And as death closes in on the knight's castle and takes all of them, Joseph and Mary and their baby, they drive away. Love has saved them. And so they asked Ingmar Bergman, are you writing about God or love? He said, well, in our tradition, God is love. And that's all he would say. Poets, filmmakers of that great high level, they don't explain. As I said before, Robert Frost never said a word about the meaning of this poem. He said, you figure it out. Maybe you know better than I. And it's true. I was listening last night, just as a caprice in the middle of the night. I was looking at some article from the Washington Post, and they give you all these references. Do you want to know the 47 greatest songs ever written? No, sure. I'm going to take an hour. I'll listen to a snippet of each one. Half of them I didn't even I never heard of them. They're just a lot of screaming to me. I didn't know what was going on. But there are a few. I would say the greatest song ever written was Suzanne by Leonard Cohen. And second would be The Sound of Silence, Simon and Garfunkel. And then a half dozen by Dylan. Isn't it interesting that all these great songwriters, most of them of the 1960s, were Jewish? That's our contribution. Words, 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 and more words. And they were extraordinary poets. Not T.S. Eliot, but who is? They were, in their way, great poets, and they were able to set it to music. Those are haunting songs. That Suzanne song is based on The Wasteland, Eliot's Wasteland. And the melody, the music, and he also wrote a love song, That's No Way to Say Goodbye, that will make you weep. Leonard Cohen was one of the great. In the Park Avenue Synagogue, we now use his Hallelujah in our High Holy Day service. Hallelujah, hallelujah. And he wrote, there's some English in it, but we do the whole thing. Hallelujah is the Hebrew word, praise the Lord. And we add some Hebrew in it. It's worthy of being put in a religious liturgy. So the times they are changing, and like a rolling stone, amazing, amazing. They were the great philosophers of that time. All right, but this is the philosophy of this book. It's so beautiful, let me repeat it. Set me as a sign on your heart, as a sign on your arm. Now, look at that. It just occurred to me that tefillin, the phylacteries that pious Jews put on, a sign on your heart. You put a box of leather prayers, you wind it around your arm and it's against your heart. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and so another little box is put here, and with all your deeds. So they wrap the straps around their hand and do it again and again around the ring finger, because we're in love with God. We're marrying God every morning by doing that. It's a wedding ceremony. And notice the images. Now, the Jews have done that tefillin thing for a heck of a long time. Jesus refers to it. So this is a few centuries earlier. Does he have that in mind? That the true tefillin, the true marks of marriage between Israel and God are echoed here. Set me as a signet on your heart. That's what it says. Al levavacha, on your heart. And the signet on your arm. And that's when you tie that thing to your arm. For love is strong as death. Religion is created by people because of fear of death, in my opinion. That certainly has been my experience. And we'll get to that with Ecclesiastes. We of all species know we're going to die. That makes everything different for us. Every great experience is qualified because we know it's temporary. And Freud had a tragic sense of life for a reason. And there's a man who was the greatest God wrestler of the 20th century. And yet he said he was an atheist. And yet he wrestled with God all his life, like Jacob. He was a true Israelite. And I think that these people also, they're wrestling with their love. And if our relationship with God is a love affair, then it's not going to run smooth. If it's too smooth and you never question and you never argue, I wonder what kind of a marriage that is between God and Israel, between God and the individual. So is he taking a Jewish practice? Look what the rabbis tried to do here. They took this love song and tried to make it into a Jewish statement between God and Israel. But the author is taking that tefillin tradition of putting the commandments literally on your arm across from your heart and saying that I'm using that as an analogy for my love for this girl. He's turned it around, if that's the case. Just occurred to me, maybe, who knows. Love is strong as death. That love, what can overcome death? And I've said this at enough funerals. Das Liebe bleibt. Der bleibt der Liebe. What remains? Love remains. What remains is love. And when two dear friends of mine died within a few days of each other, I spoke at both funerals, and they loved each other so much, so much. And there they lay in coffins next to each other as they had lain in bed for all those 70 years of their marriage or whatever. And that's what they left us, love. And in some way, that inspiration of that to love each other. Let us love each other. Remember Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. He says, love, let us be true to one another. For the world which seemed to lie before us like a land of dreams, so infinite, So something so new hath really neither love, nor light, nor or help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with, I don't remember, battles and flights of armies, where ignorant armies clash by night. Love is the answer. And in some way that defeats death. Not that you necessarily have to believe, although many do, that when we die, we go on to another life. That's what I've talked about, the infinity of a line, but the infinity of a point. If you can say, I am my beloved's, and she is mine, and she can say the same thing, and you embrace, that's a moment of eternity. Meister Eckhart spoke of eternity's day. And I've had experiences like that, and you've had experience like that. It can be making love. It can be listening to ethereal music. And sharing it, of course, with a loved one doubles the pleasure. It can be sitting next to each other and having dinner together and talking and communing and knowing that there's someone who knows your heart and you know his or her. It can be looking at a great painting. There are any number of experiences. Looking at the sky. The song I really responded to last night was "It's a Beautiful World." Louis Armstrong, what a great man he was. Abused by segregation and bigots, and he was the moral outreach of this nation and the ambassador of goodwill for America. And he says, I think to myself, what a beautiful world. I mean, what a beautiful man and what a beautiful world. And just look at I was doing vigil duty at our Confederate monument here because we have to protect it from the thugs. And I'm sitting in the harbor of Charleston in the park, in this beautiful park, looking out at the harbor and the sky, the infinite sky. I'm not used to that from Manhattan, of course. You only see little parts of it. But here the sky is so big. And the clouds, it's even the Charleston sky seems to be uniquely beautiful. And it's just such a beautiful world that God has given us. Judaism never uses the word world in a negative sense, never. It's God's gift to us, as Charleston is the gift to us of those soldiers who defended it against invaders in the 1860s. And that's why we guard their monument, because they left for the ages the most beautiful city in America. Those are moments of eternity. And the eternity of a point. And they don't last, but they last forever. In the Reformed Prayer Book, it says, when you look mythologically at the world, rather than historically, history happens and is gone. But mythos is a larger than life story which is never gone. We stand at Sinai now. It's up to us to accept God's covenant and make something of our lives in the context of the infinite now. We cross the Red Sea now and feel protected against all dangers by our loving God. It happens, what happens once, it says in the prayer book, happens all the time. When you sit at the Passover Seder, if you don't feel you're liberated by God from all the cares and the burdens of the world, then it's not working. We're not just celebrating what happened to them, if it did happen, 5,000 years ago. Well, 3,000, 3,200. I have to be liberated, or else it doesn't work. And in some way, when you have this consciousness of the infinite and the eternal, the finite doesn't hurt so much. You put it in the larger context, and you realize it's all right. It'll be all right. And we're in the loving hands of God. And min hametzah karati ya, anani b'merchav ya, out of my depth I cried unto thee, O Lord. You answered me by setting me free. The martyrs knew that. They can kill me, but they can't touch me. I'm already in the arms of God. Yes. Well, that kind of searching for the eternal, whether it be eternal duration, if you believe you're going to go to heaven, or the heavenly moment here, that conquers death. Once you've had it, you've got it forever. And it makes you see every finite thing in the context of the infinite, and that changes everything. Mighty waters cannot quench love. He said it's fire. And that fire, mighty waters cannot quench. nor torrents sweep it away. And as Jesus said, well, this guy said it long before, and Jesus generally is echoing so eloquently the Jewish tradition in which he lived his life. If you were to find that love, you would be wise to give everything for that. Even though it might not last forever. I mean, nothing does, in a sense, but this overcomes time. How do you beat time? Time is the enemy. I was just reading the most beautiful book ever written on Charleston, called Mellowed by Time by Elizabeth O'Neill Verner, who knew Charleston, a great etcher. I have a whole wall of her beautiful etchings. She's one of the great artists of the Charleston Renaissance in the 1920s. And she said, in Charleston, we have done something that no one else has achieved. We have made a friend of what to everyone else is the great enemy, time. And remember what Rabbi, what was his name? The chief rabbi of Israel, the rabbi, was it Hertz? Yes, he was asked on the radio, Rabbi, describe what you do. Chief rabbi of England, of the British Commonwealth. And he said, I am an antique stealer. And Judaism is the most beautiful and most ancient antique of Western civilization. And all I do is every morning I open the shop and I go in and I polish the antiques. And like an antique, Judaism gets more valuable and more valuable and more valuable as the years go by. It doesn't diminish in value, it gains value. So time, can we make a friend of time? That's the great challenge. If you place it within the eternal, then you defang it. And you defang death. You conquer death. And that's what this is. This is wisdom, is to understand that. How do we deal with the reality of life and the horror of death? We love. And that conquers it and makes everything all right. So verses 6 and 7, that is the philosophy, the wisdom philosophy that I think got this book into the Bible. And it is a theory that, well, it's more than, I mean, it's a dominant theory, is what is more important, intellectual wisdom or the wisdom of the heart? This book says the wisdom of the heart. Other books might disagree. We say study is the highest form of prayer. Maybe love is the highest form of prayer. Without love, then, without kavanah, without intention, without love, then our prayers go. Remember what the king says in Hamlet, my prayers go up, my words go up, my prayers remain below. Words without prayers never to heaven go. So prayer isn't just mumbling words. It is trying to let God in and embrace him in a loving relationship. So that's the philosophy of this book, and it's as beautiful as any verses I know anywhere. Verse 8. Now the chorus of the harem girls. Our sister is young, and breasts she has none. Well, they think of her as a little girl. She's going to answer. She doesn't like that crack. She's going to answer. What will we do for our sister on the day she is bespoken? Isn't she too young to be running around with this guy? And if the chorus goes on, when the boy calls for her, you see, will he really want her? She doesn't have, he thinks she has wonderful breasts. These girls are more critical. If she be a wall, verse 9, we will build on her a silver buttress. If she be a door, we will close her with cedar board. Maybe they're saying, maybe we better protect her after all. If the harem situation that I hypothesize is what's going on here, this danger, terrible danger. Remember the king and I, when the girl runs off with her lover and the king has her killed or flogged or something that so upsets the English teacher. So we better protect her. Walls and buttresses and sealing the door sounds like certain contemporary political projects. Verse 10. Now she answers the comments of her girlfriends. I am a wall, but my breasts are like towers. Don't denigrate them. Thus shall I become in his eyes as one producing grace. Grace, chen, the woman to have grace. What a great compliment. I don't give a damn what you girls think. My breasts are good enough for him, and he sees me as one possessing grace. They all said Jackie O possessed grace. This girl certainly does. She's like the hyacinth girl in Eliot's Wasteland. The image of perfection, and she's in a garden. Her hair is wet, and she's holding flowers. It's the iconic image of perfection, T.S. Eliot. His Garden of Eden. My breasts are like towers, I don't care what you say. And I've become in his eyes one producing grace. And I care what he thinks of me. I don't give a damn about you jealous girls. And now we have the boy's conclusion. Solomon has his vineyard, his harem, in Baal Hamon. He gave the vineyard to keepers. These are the eunuchs armed eunuchs who protect the girls. A man would offer for its fruit 1,000 silver pieces. Most men, to have access to those gorgeous girls that are Solomon's property and his what would you call them? I mean, they're at his beck and call for sex anytime he wants. A man would offer for its fruit, for those beautiful 1,000 silver pieces. But he says now in verse 12, but my own vineyard is before me. The 1,000 is yours, Solomon. You take the 1,000 women. But I'm happy with my gown. My own vineyard is before me. And that's all I want. And you can have all the rest, because she is unique, because he loves her. Listen, it happens all the time. I knew a young lady most of her life, and she was always, I'm going to get the most handsome husband. And she's very beautiful. Most handsome husband. And well, she found a man. He was both a doctor and a lawyer, the Jewish ideal. Now, if he had been an astronaut as well, then he would have filled out all American ideals. But he was a doctor and a lawyer, but I won't exactly say he would pass for handsome. But she said to me, isn't he beautiful? And I said, of course, how beautiful he is. Because she loved him. And he was beautiful. How true. Take the 1,000, Solomon. I'm happy with my own vineyard. Verse 13, I think, well, I don't know who's speaking here. You who dwell in gardens, companions are attentive. Make me hear your voice. Is it the girl speaking to the harem? But now I think the girl, let me hear your voice. Maybe it's the harem speaking to the girl in the garden of eroticism. You two, the boy and girl, are in that garden. Tell us what your opinion. And I think the girl is now talking to the boy. You want to hear what I have to say? This is what I have to say. Not to you, my girlfriends, but to my beloved. Verse 14, bolt, my love, be like a buck or a young stag in the Spice Mountains. Well, the Spice Mountains, we know that represents her body. So she wants him to come as a stag leaping over the fields and come to me, to my Spice Mountain. And that's her answer. Come to me, my beloved. Now, is the intensity the end? And I hope they lived happily ever after. And he got her, and she got him, and later on they wrote this beautiful book about their young love. The intensity of this book is that the erotic desire is so often frustrated. And we're all sexual beings, especially in our youth. And if you don't get it, you're always thinking about it. I mean, there are people who are apparently sexually very limited in their experience, but they're obsessed with it. And I shouldn't refer to specific people in public life, but there is a public office holder who is so pure and so chaste that he will not interview a female candidate for a job in his office unless his wife is sitting there. What does he think? Does he think he's going to jump on her? Is he that oversexed? Sex for him equals sin. And he left the Catholic Church and joined a extreme evangelical fundamentalist group. And that sex equals sin thing is such a mistake, such a misstep by the church. But I've never met a man who will not even meet with a woman unless his wife is sitting in the same room. I mean, what does it mean that Orthodox Jewish men won't sit next to a woman? Well, there's the menstrual taboo and all that. But you go into, as I've said, I've gone into Orthodox synagogues, which are otherwise lovely places, and half of the synagogue is singing and the other half is totally silent. The Kol Isha must not be heard. And that's one reason I'm not Orthodox. I think it's outrageous. Are they afraid that if there's a woman around, they're so oversexed they won't be able to concentrate on the Talmud? I mean, I think most men are capable of reading the text without being aroused by a woman who's reading it with them.
I think it.
What is it? Who's speaking? I wish I could hear her, Joe.
So I think that, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I think that derives again from the sense that Eve is evil, and that therefore that proceeds from that whole supposition that women are evil, ergo sex is evil as well.
They are temptresses. The
Yes.
fantasy. Now look at the book of, oh Lordy, Suzanne and the Elders. It's an intertestamental book. Susanna and the Elders. I can't remember. I can't remember. I should have. She's bathing. She's a beautiful young girl. She has a little home, and she goes to the river to bathe. And the elders, these dirty old men, come by and they see her and they're aroused and they accuse her of immorality, as if it's her fault. So men have this idea that their lives are regular and wonderful until she walks into my life, and then it's all chaos. And of course, it's her fault. That's why the dragon of chaos in the ancient myths is always a woman. Chaos versus order. Now, the Jews took over the chaos versus every myth. Every myth is about chaos versus order in one way or another. The Jews took over this and they made it evil versus good because they identified chaos with moral evil. And then, but again, from the philosophical tradition of the Greeks, not the Olympic tradition and all the rest, but from the Socratic tradition, the senses, it's not just said, the senses are not to be relied on. But the mind, only you have to think your way to truth, because the senses deceive us and they mislead us. So the true philosopher wants to be separated from his body and eats and drinks as little as possible, and sex, he doesn't have to have that at all. So that's the idea. And the church, I didn't come up with this, Heschel did. Maybe the second greatest Jewish philosopher of the 20th century. And I had the privilege of taking a few classes with him at the Jewish Theological Seminar. He said that the church made a misstep, and he spoke lovingly of the church. He was in the forefront of the Jewish-Christian dialogue. And he felt friendly enough to them to say this. As a friendly outsider, he said, you made a misstep when you went with the Greek philosophical tradition regarding the body rather than the Jewish tradition. But ultimately, the rabbis in Orthodox Judaism took the same turn. And we're all Hellenized in one way or another. The Maccabees fought a war against Hellenization, but then they became Hellenized. So it was inevitable. That was the environment of the day. And so in Orthodox Judaism, the body is viewed in very suspicious ways. But they certainly believe in having sex at the right time, 2 weeks a month, and they produce enough children, so they certainly are doing it, but I don't know in what spirit. I certainly can't, I don't know, I have no idea what I'm talking about now. But there is that feeling in so many religions, there's something wrong with the body and with the flesh and all All right, well, that's certainly not what the Song of Songs is saying. It's the frustration of bodily and emotional desire. That's the problem, not the desire. The very opposite. Was it a conscious opposite to the book of Genesis story, the Garden of Eden? I don't know, but it might have been. All right, we now go on to Kohelet, means the assembler, a man who assembles a class. And he was an independent sage, and they grew up during the 400 to 300 BCE period under the Persians, and their Persian borrowed words here, and under the Greeks. The thought is thoroughly Greek, not Hebrew. And next week we'll talk about specific Greek philosophers that could be cited, the Stoics and Marcus Aurelius and various other groups that I'll list. Heraclitus, everything's in motion. And the Epicureans, well, if you can't really achieve anything in the world, then eat, drink, and be merry. That it's much closer to Greek thought than Hebrew. Now, however, before we do that, we have 5 minutes, and I mean, we can start my notes to the book and then the book next week. And you have the outline. The question arises, when we finish with Ecclesiastes, an ecclesia, meaning a church or a gathering, again, one who gathers, he got a class together. And then the problem is, where do we go from here? I fear that this plague will still be with us, and some of you at least might want to go on studying on Thursday night, or if there's a night that's preferable to most of you, I don't care what night it is. But what to do? I have taught every book of the Bible in Charleston over the last 25 years, with the exception of the Gospel of John, which I always put off because I'm not a fan. But I had started it at my St. Stephen's class when we were interrupted by this plague, as was my Martin Buber class at KKBE. Now, the Gospel of John, of course, we have a mixed audience here of Jews and Christians. I don't know what the percentages are. It's probably 2/3 Jews, 1/3 Christians, something like that. I want something that will appeal to everybody. The Gospel of John is not a book that's going to appeal to Jews. But I had an idea. Rabbi Soloveitchik, the greatest Orthodox rabbi of the second half of the 20th century, at least in America, wrote a book that I don't think I've ever taught here. And if anybody knows that I have, then speak up. It's called The Lonely Man of Faith. It's 100 pages. It's a brilliant theological tour de force. And, yes, someone's holding up. And does that mean I've taught it here? I don't think I've taught it in Charleston. I did Martin Buber.
Oh, I just have it.
And we could do Heschel. I mean, he's written some beautiful things. And eventually, if we go on and on with this, I would want to get to him. But that book is an extraordinary, and I don't even like the man, because he was an enemy of Jewish-Christian dialogue. He caused me a lot of trouble in his later years. He forbade Orthodox theologians to get involved with the Jewish-Christian dialogue. He wanted us to work together for ethical ends, and he recognized Christians and Jews have the same ethical values, but never theology. And my business is theology, so he would have put me out of business. But the Orthodox rabbis, by the way, at this point, recently, just in the last few years, have gotten on board the dialogue. And so they've gone beyond Soloveitchik. And Soloveitchik's book is based on what I consider to be a misreading of the Bible, where he believes that Moses wrote the 6-day story of creation and the Garden of Eden story. Orthodox Jews feel obliged to believe that. So he ends up talking about two Adams, Adam 1 and Adam 2. And they both represent important aspects of the human person. It's a fascinating and brilliant book. But that would mean you all would have to buy it. And if it's 100 pages, I would assign 10 pages a week. And then it would be a 10-week course. But the question is, would you be willing to do that? That's taking adult ed a little higher, as I did when I did Buber. And I thought I'd get 3 students. I ended up with 25. So you have to get the book from, well, I hate to recommend Amazon, because in Charleston, there's a Blue Bicycle Bookshop, which will deliver any book. And I believe strongly in supporting local bookshops. And that's a great bookshop on King Street, just above Marion Square. But if you're not in Charleston, if you live off, that's everywhere but Charleston, and you have to use Amazon, so be it. The book is The Lonely Man of Faith by Joseph Soloveitchik. Don't ask me how to spell that one. It begins with S-O-L. So, but I won't, there's no reason to decide now. We're going to be at this for a few more weeks with Ecclesiastes, see how fast that goes. And then where do we go? So think about it. If you have another suggestion, a favorite book you want us to go over, but remember it has to be of interest to both Jewish and Christian students, then make a suggestion. I think Soloveitchik's book really applies to everybody. It's not the fact, he was sort of narrowly Jewish, but I think the book is universal. The Lonely Man of Faith. Because all of us are Adam, and all of us have the aspects of the 2 sides of Adam that he's talking about. So think about it. I would suggest that. I'd be happy doing it, but I'd be happy doing anything else I feel competent to teach. That does not include physics or even high school math, which I was so terrible. I just couldn't get it. What is that kind of math? It's all the X's. You have to find what X represents.
Algebra.
Algebra. Oh my God. I never got to trigonometry. God knows what that is. But, and I avoided it. In college, my average was brought down because I got a C in biology, a zoology, because I refused to kill the frog. So I used the frog that the instructor had already killed. The idea of holding a life, something that's alive, and sticking a pin in its brain and ending that life I can't do that. Now, if I were not a hypocrite, I am a hypocrite, I would be a vegetarian. That follows. If I don't want to do the killing, why should I hire other people to do it for me? But I'm not that morally advanced. And will be among us who at future generations will denounce as monsters for eating animals, just as they're now denouncing people for having slaves, as if you can expect 18th century people to think like 21st century, but the whole thing's absurd. Do you know that a House resolution was passed that will remove Confederate statues from all federal owned property, which means when you go to Gettysburg, you'll see 100 statues to the Union soldiers and not one to the thousands and thousands of Southern boys who died on that battlefield. Who were the Union fighting? Nobody? This is an outrage and a disgrace. And yet this was passed by the House, the Democrats. That gives me, I find myself between Scylla and Charybdis here. The extremists and Trump on one side and the extremist Democrats on the other. Biden is not, he's a fine man. Choice for vice president, excellent. But what influence will the crazies have on him? I don't know. This is going to be a very uncomfortable election for me. If they tear down the monuments to my ancestors, one of whom gave his life at 18 years old to protect the South, and the boys who saved this city from being destroyed are not worthy of a monument, demonized. People of my blood. When you attack a Confederate statue, to me, it's like attacking a synagogue. This is a clay kodesh, a holy vessel. And much of my time spent on the defense of our monuments here. All right, I've gone off the track, but I'm sorry, I just had to unburden my. There's nobody else here to talk to, so I have to talk to y'all about it. Y'all.
One thing Mario just mentioned is that he has a PDF of The Lonely Man of Faith. And I think it's out of copyright. So you would need to purchase it if you wanted to read a PDF, a digital copy.
Well, let's try. I mean, let's see what Amazon says. They can get anything, right? I'm not going to use them. I'm going to have my copy somewhere. Could it be out of print? That's very hard to believe.
No, it's not out of print. I just think that it's out of, that it can be distributed without, the PDF can be distributed, I think, at this point for free.
Yeah. If you read that on a screen.
Mario just sent a chat saying that.
What is the PDF?
Can I recommend a movie, since you've been recommending movies?
First, I want to know what a PDF is.
A PDF is the document like I send out with the, it's a kind of document that everybody can read on anything. It's like
On the internet.
outlines that I sent out, yeah.
But you have to read it from the screen, in other words, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well,
Excuse me, Michael, this is
somebody had a question.
Michael, this is Michael Spiegler, Michael. If you had passed math, you would have known what a PDF was. That's all.
I was always we had 5 math classes, and I was in the stupid math class, the most imbecile of children. And it hasn't hurt my career at all, believe me.
Michael, can I recommend a movie to you? Okay, this movie is The Enchanted Cottage with Robert Young and Dorothy McGuire. If you want to talk about what is a beautiful concept about love, and having the concept of love as what is internal, not as what is external, that is a movie that I think is amazingly beautiful. It's just incredible. End of story. I'll shut up now.
Michael, can you hear me? It's Alice. It's Alice.
I see you, Alice.
Okay. Instead of thinking about a book, why don't you possibly think about a theme? In other words, if you chose love, which is really too big, you could do different parts of the Bible, different kinds of love, okay? Or you could do something about what makes a great ruler. That would be timely. Or, any other kind of overarching theme that we could look at different parts.
Thank you. It's a good suggestion. I have never done that. My way of teaching is explication du texte. I like to have a complete text before me so the students who study can say, now I know what the Song of Songs is about. Now I grasp Ecclesiastes or Kant or Husserl or T.S. Eliot. I do all of T.S. Eliot's poems. And the same thing with Heidegger or Sartre. You take a book and you just do it word by word. So, but that's another way of teaching, and it's not natural to me, but it's possible that
You could think of something. And if you don't mind, Mike, because I know you know everything, if you don't mind my correcting you, the Betty Davis movie, Claude Rains doesn't say a woman is beautiful when she's in love. It is when she is loved.
I said that.
Is that what you said? It didn't sound that way to me, yes. That's a much more profound statement.
It's true about anybody. I mean, a few of us look like, I don't know who's the most beautiful. I mean, the woman who played Scarlett O'Hara. Who played Scarlett O'Hara?
Vivian Lee.
Yes.
Fiddle-dee-dee.
Fiddle-dee-dee.
Pardon me?
Fiddle-dee-dee. Fiddle-dee-dee. That's what she says.
I picked her And who would the man be? Well, Clark Gable in those days, but who knows him?
Leslie.
Leslie Howard.
I just saw him in another movie the other night. He's always so great.
Romeo and Juliet with Norma Shearer.
Frederick March, when he in Death Takes a Holiday, which is an incredibly great movie. He is so beautiful. I mean, you couldn't imagine a better looking man. And few of us look that way. And yet we find love. And you live long enough, you have several women or men in your life. And it's rarely because anybody who marries somebody because of their appearance is a fool, because of course that changes. You marry because of some much deeper bond, which one hopes will last. So remember when God sent Samuel out to find a king, first he found Saul because he was so tall and handsome. It says that's why he chose him. He looked kingy. Think of King Juan Carlos of Spain, not now, but as he was when he inherited the kingdom from Franco. He looked kingy, tall, handsome young man. But look at Napoleon and a lot of other people who were great people and great kings, and they didn't look the part. Didn't matter. It really ultimately doesn't matter that much. That you look at Henry Kissinger, had all these women, and he said the power is the greatest aphrodisiac. That's what they were after, not his appearance. He was an ordinary looking guy. So most people are smart enough to look deeper. So he went out and got Saul, who was a disaster, and then God sent Samuel out again. He said, go put on your king-finding outfit, and this time do not look upon the height of his stature or upon his beautiful countenance. God does not look upon such things. God looks upon the heart. Bring me a man with the heart of a king. And David is described as small and had the heart of a giant. That's what the story of Goliath is about. That if you have a heart big enough, you can fill the giant. All right, my friends, think on the suggestion of Soloveitchik. Think of some others if you would prefer something else. And I will go with a simple majority vote. If we only have a few candidates, we'll see who gets the majority vote. So think about it. If you have a book that I'm capable of teaching, I would be happy to take something on. I'd like to learn something new too. Of course, you learn every time you teach great literature, you learn it anew, and new things pop into your head.
Kierkegaard.
Kierkegaard, indeed. I say he's the greatest Christian theologian since Paul. I also Schleiermacher.
Schleiermacher, yes.
Kierkegaard. I think Kierkegaard is Schleiermacher on steroids.
Have you ever taught your book?
Yes.
Okay, I missed it. I've read it several times, but I've missed your teaching.
It's not big enough to be a doorstop, but people have actually opened it. That's a possibility if nobody here has do that. There's a recent article I wrote. I could have that somehow. I'll have to talk to Joe how to get that to you, so you don't have to buy the whole book.
I bought it.
Great. One article in a book that thick. It's a thick.
You're fading. You're fading. I think, is that?
You hear me now? Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
So we might, as an interim, do my most recent article, which I've never taught, called Welcoming Jesus Home, which is, despite the title, a very Jewish article. Well, despite everything, Jesus is a very Jewish article. And let's see if I can get that printed up somehow, so you don't have to buy the whole book. Let me investigate. We could do that for a few weeks until we decide where to go from here. That might be good. Not my book, but this is just I don't know, 20 pages, 25 pages. But there's a lot in it.
John, you'll have to unmute yourself again, John.
Does anyone else want to say something?
I'd be happy to, this is John. I'd be happy to copy those pages and put them into a PDF format for everyone and just email them to you.
That would be good. Then why don't we do that? That'll keep us busy for a few weeks, and then we'll decide. I mean, how long? I don't know how long Kohelet's going to take us. Not as long as Job, but again, a lot of it is repetition, but we'll hit the high points. All right, my friends. Goodbye for a week. And John, if you would do that, I'd much appreciate it. That would make
Hi,
things.
everyone.
Okay, folks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Good night, Michael.
Shalom.